On Gaza, the UN's Humanitarian Affairs Office has said that 15 paramedics, civil defence and a UN worker were killed, in their words, one by one by the IDF. They have dug bodies up, they said, in the shallow grave that have been gathered up, and also vehicles in the sand. Have you got any assessment of what might have happened, and given the potential use of American weapons, is there any assessment of whether or not this complied with international law?
Well, I can tell you that for too long, Hamas has abused civilian infrastructure, cynically using it to shield themselves. Hamas's actions have caused humanitarians to be caught in the crossfire. The use of civilians or civilian objects to shield or impede military operations is itself a violation of international humanitarian law. And, of course, we expect all parties on the ground to comply with international humanitarian law.
But there's specifically a question on any... It's a question about accounting and accountability, given that it may have been the use of US weapons. So it's a question about the State Department rather than Hamas. Is there any action to assess?
Every single thing that is happening in Gaza is happening because of Hamas. Every single dynamic. I'll say again, I've said it, I think, in every briefing. All of this could stop in a moment if Hamas returned all the hostages and the hostage bodies they are still holding and put down its weapons. There is one entity that could stop it for everyone in a moment, and that is Hamas. All loss of life is regrettable. It's key, obviously. Whoever it is, wherever they live, and this has been the nature of what fuels Secretary Rubio and President Trump in their willingness to expend this kind of capital early on in this term to make a difference and to change the situation. So I think that is the one thing that remains clear in all of this, which is all for all of us, which is why we work to stop it.
I know that's
a horrible dynamic. Yes, Humaira. Humaira.
Hi, Tammy. Just to follow up from Jenny, are you able to say if these deportations of alleged gang members, Venezuelans, are these going to continue? And while you can't say under which authority they were deported, are you able to say which authority they will be deported? No. If there would be new ones?
No, I can't speculate.
Different way of
hypotheticals in a certain sense. Obviously, also, we have not announced who's on that plane. The details, I'm not going to accept the premise immediately of who is on that plane. That's not what I can do here at this podium. What I do know, again, is that every action that is taken by this administration is to fulfill the promise that elected them to office that the American people want, which is to have a safe community, which is to be able to live their lives knowing that perhaps the next day will come and that the future for their children and grandchildren will be maybe a little bit better than theirs has been. So this is that larger picture. But I'm not going to get into the details of a particular flight.
Are you able to say confidently that the TRO wasn't violated?
I'm not here to give you my legal opinion. I'm not a lawyer, or to speculate on what is or is not happening in any fashion in that regard. Yes, sir. The glasses here.
Thank you, Tammy. Someday the State Department's going to make the mistake of hiring a lawyer to be a spokesperson, and then
then it would be even less interesting than mine. Yes.
Two questions for you. Number one, a few weeks after President Trump's Shalom Hamas tweet or social media post, Israeli authorities giving indication that they're preparing for a potential larger-scale military operation in Rafah, potential reoccupation of Gaza. I wanted to get some insight as to whether there is coordination between the U.S. and Israel on that front, whether the State Department takes a position on Israel's potential plans. The second question was, Israeli officials have been sounding the alarm about Egypt's military operations in Sinai, saying that it's a potential violation of the peace treaty between the two countries. Any position from the State Department in regards to Egypt's activities and whether they deem it a violation of the peace treaty?
Well, we never speak about ongoing diplomatic relationships, but we do have the pillars of our approach that remain resolute. We stand with Israel and we stand for peace. President Trump has made clear the consequences of what will happen if Hamas continues to hold hostages. I will leave it at that, but of course add in the fact that Secretary Rubio has been as aggressive in his rhetoric that Hamas cannot continue to exist, and again, that we stand with Israel and their efforts to defend themselves.
On Egypt?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you give me anything on Egypt?
No, yeah.
Thank you, Terry. So you had said earlier this month that the deadline for the State Department to submit a report to the president detailing recommendations for visa and travel restrictions, as outlined in an executive order he signed in January, had been moved from March 21st. What is the new date for that report, and what is the status of those recommendations?
Well, what I said at the time when asked is that that was a target date that is no longer applies, without giving you details. So there was no deadline in that regard. But the State Department, like every department in President Trump's administration, are acting on executive orders, including this one.
Why was it postponed?
I can't speak to that, but I can tell you that we're working on what the executive order asked for, which is not travel bans, of course, but the nature of restrictions from other countries, whether or not they meet the standard of security and vetting that's required for entry into the United States.
So has a new date been set yet?
No. But again, it's not, again, because there's not a date, it doesn't mean that it's not being worked on. So we are all working to implement what President Trump has ordered. Yes, sir, in the back right there. No, in front here, sir.
Thank you. Tom Watkins at The National. Two questions. On the subject of student deportations, several pro-Israel activist groups are providing US authorities with the names of people involved in last year's pro-Palestinian protests. Among those names are naturalized Americans, people originally from the Middle East but who are now US citizens. Can you tell me, is the US weighing any action against American citizens who spoke out during last year's protests?
Well, I would have to speculate on that. I also, I'm not going to discuss the nature of the diplomatic or strategic conversations that any department in the government's having, let alone the State Department. What I can tell you is, as just repeating what Secretary Rubio has said, is that if you come into this country, if you've lied to get in this country, and you've come into this country and have committed crimes, or have clearly, if you've done something, whereas if you told us you were going to do it when you were applying for that visa, you would never have gotten that visa. And we're going to be very aggressive in the nature of acting on that. He's made that very clear. But I won't discuss the nature of decision-making in that framework or speculate on the nature of what the department will be doing.
Even someone who's become a naturalized U.S. citizen could still be...
Don't draw conclusions, because I'm not answering your question.
Okay.
That's a big mistake. I'm not answering the specifics of your question. Don't draw that conclusion. Don't put words in my mouth. That's not what I said. Yes, sir.